focused in
All right.
in Judaism in late antiquity. So on a personal note, I was involved with the creation of this event, and we'll go back in the time machine for a little bit. It's 1992. A charismatic Bill Clinton is a rising star in the Democratic Party. The Mazda Miata is the hot car, and people are accessing the internet on AOL. And I was an undergrad at U of I, and Professor Porton was involved with a very popular comparative religion class that I always wanted to take. Unfortunately, 4 years go by very quickly, and I didn't. So fast forward, I'm not going to go through all the details, but I was connected to Dr. Porton, and here we are. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Porton.
Welcome.
I can tell you all the jokes I told in that class. The class involved me teaching Judaism from Ezra, actually, to you in 3 lectures. I had 3 hours. So it was a very, I affected a lot of people, but it was a very interesting class. I want to thank you for the invitation. Driving up here from the city, as you know, was a great adventure. But I made it despite the adventure, and there was only slight problems. But everything is fine. Let me begin by telling you what you probably already know, but what you need to understand clearly about Judaism. First of all, Judaism is a construct. Judaism doesn't exist. Jews exist, varieties exist, but Judaism is a mental construct. And like all constructs and all generalities, it's false. So all the generalities I'm going to tell you about Judaism are limited in time and space. But we can't think that way. So the first thing you have to understand is what I'm going to tell you are moments in time. We're going to talk at specific moments. And to understand that moment, if we were really, really interested, we'd have to unpack the environment, the time period, what happened, who these Jews were, who this person was, who we're going to look at. That's the first thing to understand. The second thing to understand is, despite what you have been told your entire lives, but you know that it's not true, but you still believe it, is that the halakha changes. It changes continually, or we wouldn't be here. So when we look at a moment in time, that moment in time was important for that time. But because of the way Jews operate, it's also important for us. The categories, the way they thought, because we're going to do something with that. We're not going to forget everything in the past. We're going to change it, but we're going to pretend like we didn't change it. I will quote one of the most important Catholic theologians of the 1960s. Hans Kuhn was the radical Swiss theologian of the 1960s. And when I was an undergraduate at UCLA, I had the honor of hearing him. And I had a very close Catholic friend at the time, and she said, see, that person in civvies, that's a priest, that person's no, because we were civvies. It was post-Vatican II, and it was all in the 60s. And then she said, see that guy over there, he's from the Cardinal's office. He's taking down the names of all those nuns and priests taught in cities. I remember that because it struck me as very Catholic. But the other thing I remember is Hans Kuhn said, the Pope never errs, and when the Pope does err, the Church makes it appear as if the Pope hasn't erred. remember that because I always use the line. The halakha never changes. And when it does change, the rabbis make it appear as if it hasn't changed. It's the same thing. So again, we're going to look at moment in time. The other thing is, and you all know the jokes, Jews don't agree about anything. You all know two Jews, three opinions. You all know the person being saved from the island. This is the synagogue I go to. This is the synagogue I don't go to. You all know this stuff. It's important because while Jews agree on a lot of things, the details of how we might do something is going to not be always something that we agree upon. So we're not going to go through this whole sheet. It's much too long. But you will see in here, Maimonides will say something, and then somebody else will say the exact opposite. And then the next generation has to figure out how that works. And generally, the way you figure out how that works is you get very close reading and say, well, they're not really talking about the same thing. They were, but you can figure out a way that they're not. So you never do anything. The other thing that happens, and I found this thing, and it's included here, and it's a wonderful statement from the 1956 Supreme Court judges on why you must follow the state of Israel, or the parliament and the prime minister. And it's framed in the terms of Dina de Malchuta Dina. The law of the land is the law. But its category is, even though the prime minister isn't a king, and even though we don't live with kings, the law still applies. Now, only in a Jewish mind could a law about kings apply at a time when there are no kings. And you have to understand that, because that's true. We talk in the language, but we change definitions. And you also know that story. Why is the name of God, the word God, repeated before each of the matriarchs and patriarchs? Because the God of Jacob wasn't the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac wasn't the God of Jacob, and the God of Sarah wasn't the God of Abraham. You all know those stories. It's true in the sense that Judaism keeps evolving. So there is no Jewish anything. There's no Jewish theory of politics. There are a lot of Jewish theories of politics. These ideas change depending on the environment in which Jews live. So whatever the question is about Jews, what do Jews think? I mean, if I were to go ask any of you what Jews think about anything, at any one of these tables, if you all agreed, I would be totally surprised. But you're not supposed to agree. You're supposed to agree on the values, but you're not supposed to agree unnecessarily on how you implement those values or how you implement those ideas. The last point, we tend to think, and because everybody's always told you this, that Judaism is more about doing than thinking. It's a religion of law and not a religion of thought. That's not true. It's just we don't emphasize the thought. The Jewish tradition argues, up until the 18th century, Jews, Christians, and Muslims all believed that God existed. They all believed in the truth of the Hebrew Bible. They interpreted it differently, but they all believed the Hebrew Bible was true. They all believed that the prophets were true. Again, they interpreted it differently, but they all agreed on everything. And before Spinoza, Jews agreed on everything as a theological premise. God existed. We may not know what God is. We may not know what God does. after Kabbalah and after Luria, we may not know God's gender, but we all agree that God functioned and God actually acted in the world. We all believed in salvation. We did not know what it was, but we all believed that at the time, God created the world according to a plan. That plan is the Torah. It is our obligation to live out that plan. And at the end of time, the plan's going to work out. And we win. Then everybody wins because we won. Now, we all believe that. And I said, and if you believe that, if you believe that God existed and acted in the world and revealed God's will and plan and was going to reward and punish you in relationship to how you live that plan, you would be an Orthodox Jew. And the reason you're not is because you don't believe what they believed. And that leads you to the type of Jew you are. Now, we don't think in those terms because we don't talk about belief. But belief is actually really important. Because when you think about why you are the type of Jew you are, and why you implement the type of Judaism you implement in your life or in your congregation, it's because of how you relate to those three basic principles. God exists, God reveals God's will, and at the end of time, God's will and plan is going to be worked out. Now, however you believe in that, and there are all sorts of ways to work that out. We've been doing that for 2,000 years, and we still can't agree on it. That's how you then deal with these ideas. So let me give you some of the ideas. The topic is Jews and politics. Now, you all know, because you're all members of this congregation, Jews, there's no politics involved in your congregation. It is a totally apolitical existence. Your rabbi can tell you there are no politics involved there, and you all know that. Okay. The first thing that Judaism and understands is that you can't have a society, or you can't have a group of people without having rules. The chaos of the first 11 chapters of Genesis leads us to Abraham, who leads us to eventually Egypt, who leads us to Sinai. And as you know, right now we're counting the Omer, which leads us to the Exodus, which leads us to Sinai. You can't have freed slaves without having rules, and you can't have society without having rules. Stability is the only way you can run a world. And in a world in which God is an active force, Jeremiah said, "Pray for the welfare of the city to which you have been exiled." And the first reference we had to a prayer for a non-Jewish government. Jeremiah 29:7. Jeremiah lived during the exile. The exact quote is, "Seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you. Pray to Adonai for its well-being, and you shall prosper." That's God's instruction to Jeremiah. Understanding that a city is a better place for Jews if it's stable than if it's not. and I'm sure you all know the quote from Pirkei Avot, pray for the welfare of the government, for if it were not for fear of the government, people would swallow one another up. It's the same theory. It's why you vote for the government that you voted for, because you believe that that party, that person, that mayor, that whatever is going to create a stable setting in which you can do what you want to do. And other people can do what they're going. That is a Jewish concept. Stable government gives you a stable environment in which you can live, and it makes no difference whether that government is Jewish or not Jewish. Stability is always better than instability if you have a group of people, which is the basic premise of Jewish political theory. Stability. Jeremiah, or God tells Jeremiah to pray for the city, because in Jeremiah's world, prayer was effective. You prayed and you got answers, and you did what God told you to do if God was speaking to you. If you go through the list under one, Maimonides, when discussing the well-being of the body, the government of the state, the establishment of the best possible relations among man, is anterior to nature and time of the welfare of the soul. To Maimonides, your welfare, your intellectual well-being is more important than your external environment, which runs totally against Pirkei Avot, Jeremiah. But that's Maimonides, who believes that your success depends on your intellect and not on the world in which you live. And that the greatest achievement is your being able to live the religious life that he wants you to live. The Meiri, anarchy and the collapse of the social structure will of necessity divert a person's attention from religious matters and obligations to the more mundane matters of personal security and survival. Stable political order is necessary for one to lead a religious life. What do you think about that? It's E on the first page. Yes, go ahead.
I know we could answer that.
Yeah, so I just was thinking of the Maslow's hierarchy. Yeah. You want to take that one? Yeah.
What? Go ahead.
He beat Maslow by a few centuries. He beat Maslow,
Yeah.
Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah.
He beat Maslow by a few centuries.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Anybody else? It's a very different reason for wanting stability. Especially if you are Jewish. Because what is the one fact of being Jewish? Every place with these, well, probably every place until just recently in the 21st century. What is the one fact of the Jewish communities in the world?
One God.
No, what is one fact of
A
the?
minority.
They've always been a minority. There has never been a majority Jewish government, even at the period of the Second Temple. They were a minority of Jews within the Holy Land. They weren't a majority. They always have been a minority. And we know, I mean, you know, the biblical period, they've got all these people around them and they're always smaller than everybody else. The only reason the only reason the kings are able to succeed in the Hebrew Bible is because everybody else is chaotic. And they're always being overrun by the more powerful nations. And, you know, I mean, you can trace the history. You can tell the downfall of every other nation because Israel's strong. The same thing with the Maccabees. The Maccabees are strong because the rest of the world, after Antiochus falls, everybody and his brother-in-law is claiming to be the Syrian ruler. I mean, literally. When Syria and Egypt are weak, when Rome rises to power, forget Jewish power. Being a minority, if you've got a, you know, what you took us, you don't have time to do what you're supposed to do. If you're a minority, you're worried about that issue of stability. Sure, no, go ahead.
Maybe premature, you may be covering it later. But there have been standout revolutionaries that are Jewish. Emma Goldman, Karl Marx, folks that stand up for other people's rights.
Individual Jews. Well, the principle of Judaism, what makes a good government in Judaism? And this will answer your question. How do you evaluate a government in Judaism?
Is it good for the Jews?
Well, that's one answer. What's the other answer? What's the answer that they're going to give you?
Justice.
The answer is, are you following the precepts of the Torah? The way they read it, and the precepts of the Torah. You know, every one of the people you talk about, it's not an accident. Now, whether they understood that they, you know, were doing this for Jewish reasons, some of them did, some of them didn't. But the ideal of, we just finished one of the great law codes. And this week's parasha has this the law you all know, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, a wound for a wound. And you all know the rabbis never counted it. But what you don't know is how revolutionary that is. Because in all the other law codes that we know at the same time, if a big shot put out a little shot's eye, you should get fearless. Nobody cared. If a little shot put out a big shot's eye, he was dead. The idea that an eye for an eye applies to you no matter of your social class is the revolutionary part of the Jewish law code. We ignore that because we're all concerned with how gruesome it is to take out an eye. But when you compare the Jewish law code to the other law codes we know about, and we have 3 or 4 other law codes, what's revolutionary about the Jewish law code, and what's revolutionary about the prophets, and what was revolutionary last week about the gleaning and the leket and the corners, is that Judaism perceives a world that is not equal, but a world in which we have mutual responsibility for people's welfare. Now, it may be just Jewish people welfare, or people within the camp, or people who are attached to the camp. But it's still our obligation to do that. And that plays into the revolutionary movements. That's why the 19th century or revolutionaries and early 20th century revolutionaries and all the social reformers, or many of them, tended to be Jews, because they tend to be secular Jews, but they tend to be Jews, because this idea that we have a responsibility to other human beings is Judaism's way of viewing the world, unlike the competing view of the world, which is very, very personal. Salvation in Christianity is individual. Your first obligation is to yourself. In Judaism, your first obligation is to God and God's law. Then your obligation to yourself. Then your obligation to the community. And Judaism, the one thing that Judaism does, and you know it from this congregation, boy, I can read on your website, and you know it from the fact you're here, is, what makes Judaism different from the other religions? We could do that for a long time. But one of the things we do essentially different from the other religions is we mediate between the individual and the community in ways that the other religious traditions of the world don't. It's why we don't have monks. We had them, but we don't have them anymore. It's why we don't have people living, even even the Hasidic saints. We don't have people living out there. We have people living in groups. And as you all know, you can't do what you need to do to be Jewish by yourself. You can't do it psychologically, and you can't do it philosophically. Even though it is your obligation to do it yourself. And that is the background of this. It's also the background of the fact that you all know that all of the social scientists, scientific disciplines, archaeology, anthropology, psychology, sociology, the great minds, especially in America, but also in Europe, who analyze human communities were Jews. They were founded, all of these disciplines were founded by Jews because, again, they are concerned with community as much as they are concerned with individuals. And the entire political structure is created that way. You all know about the pre-modern Kahal, the collective Jewish community. This is a very strange place because it's actually people older than I am, which never happens to me now. But many of you remember the Havurah movement in American Judaism, which when we all got tired of being institutions, and we all broke up in little groups. But we all broke up in little groups. But there were groups. We never break out into individual groups. It's not Jewish. It may be the way you work, but it's not the way Jews think. It's not the way the Jewish polity thinks. It is why you know everybody else's business in the congregation. Okay, so that's one principle, and the idea that you are obligated to yourself and to God and to everybody that is part of your community, and you are constantly mediating that. And that's another important Jewish value. And it's another important political value. And as early as we have Jewish sources, the Torah, I mean, you read it last week. If something falls from the sickle, you leave it. You don't harvest a corner of your fields. If you forget something in the field, you leave it. You can't go back. And it stays there. You don't give it to the poor. You don't tell them, go get it. You leave it and they will find it. But it's your obligation. And that's, so that you understand that obligation. And you do it because that's what God says, but you do it also to support the community. The Mishnah has an entire structure of a welfare system, and the Talmud works the whole thing out. The Kahal had all of these committees to work this out. They had, to make sure that everybody got matzah, to make sure that there was a dowry for women who could not afford a dowry. There was a burial society. I mean, we've done this all along. The great social movement in Christianity, which begins in the 19th century, we were doing for generations, partially because we were a minority, but more importantly, because it was Jewish value. The other major Jewish value is Dina de Malchuta Dina. The law of the land is the law. I'm sure you all know that joke too. The two men at the bar. Oh, this is the other one. The two men at the bar, and the guy turns to the other one and says, I make all the important decisions in my house. My wife makes all the minor decisions. Oh, really? What decisions does she make? Oh, she makes the minor decisions. How we spend our money, what we eat, what we buy for clothes. Well, then, what are your main decisions? Whether we go to war, whether there's peace in the Middle East. The same thing with Dina de Malchuta Dina. Dina de Malchuta Dina is an agreement that the law of the government is the law. It's the blessing of the czar. May God bless and keep the czar far away from us. Dina de Malchuta Dina, which is a 3rd century Babylonian doctrine. The law of the land is the law. It's the basic Jewish principle of dealing with the government. What it does, there's a whole section on it. It's page 7. Yeah, page 7. The principle is that we will accept the Babylonians' government if they will allow us to do the minor things. And the minor things are the same things that we are most concerned with even today. And it actually is how this Supreme Court justice works out the situation in Israel. What's important to us is our community. And what was important in 5th century Babylonian, or in the 3rd century Babylonian, and then throughout the Middle Ages, and what's important to minority culture. You want to be able to regulate, especially if you're Jewish, you want to be able to regulate food. You want to be able to regulate kashrut. You want to be able to regulate marriages. You want to be able to regulate divorces. You want to be able to regulate inheritance. You want to be able to regulate the life in the community. And because you believe that the end of time and salvation depends on your ability to live out God's Torah. You want to be free to do that. You really don't have much choice. But the agreement is you will not revolt. You will not take sides with the government's enemies. And we know this for a fact. We know that during the late Sasanian period, we know this in other periods of Jewish history, that they sided with the government over marauding armies and invading armies, because that gave them protection. Despite the fact that they understood that, they virtually had no rights, which made it even more tenuous. They also understood that having no rights, the only way they could have them was to side with the government. But the Dina de Malchut Dina is an agreement that we will support you in the big things if you let us lead the things that are important to us in our life. And this was Samuel and Shapur II. And that principle still rules today. Now, that doesn't mean that Jews will not take grievances to the government. There's a long history. You all know, I'm sure you know the history of Hasidism and the Mityakim. They couldn't wait to go to the government to get one of the other side thrown in the prison. I mean, the founder of Chabad wrote his most famous book, the Tanya, in prison. We know all of this stuff. It doesn't, and you know about the sodomy ring in upstate New York. And this court that the case that the report just heard about giving government money to parochial schools. If you look at the side and at the comments by the traditional Jewish community, that were supporting that because they want the money for their schools. So I mean, it doesn't mean we won't get involved with the government when it's to our advantage. But in principle, Jews stay out of government affairs. And it's part of the issue we're going through today. It's part of the issue of American Jewish reluctance to be vocal about how they feel about political issues. To go back to what the rabbi said, is it bad for the Jews or is it good for the Jews? It's not trivial. It's not trivial if you stand up and make your point of view known. And there are people out there. I mean, those of us who live in Chicago with that city council and that mayor have a lot of issues. And, many of us voted for the man because the other guy was even worse. And we're now all sorry who voted for that man. But, I mean, the man is who he is. The other guy is who he was and who he is too. So it wasn't even the lesser of two evils. So it's the worst of two worships. And you hope that one of them was smarter than the other. We proved wrong, but it's a whole nother issue. And I don't want to get into politics. But you understand this. That principle is a principle of Judaism. Yes, go ahead. Oh, see.
It would seem to imply that the traditional Jews would be in favor of small government and not having interference in their community, and things like equality of marriage and gay rights and all these other things. The traditional Jews say, don't tell us how to run things, we know better.
It would appear that way for some Jews. There are other Jews, however, who are going to tell you that gay marriages are anti-halachic, that, it's again, the tradition is going to say your examples are wrong. Small government, if it can govern according to the ethics of the Torah, is fine. And if it can guarantee security and stability, it's fine. The size doesn't matter. And until you get, you know, until the 20th century, actually until you get it past, until you get it past the 60s, because well, a lot of you know, Judaism before the 60s was in many circles as liberal as liberal Judaism is today. I mean, I always tell people, I had a gay professor my best professor of history used to live as gay, and there were gays in the 60s. You know, no Jewish family had gays, but there was this weird uncle and cousin. And Jews never had an abortion, except you find out, you know, that grandma and great grandma and Auntie Fanny, you know, lost a child somewhere along the line. You know, and there were no Jewish, there had never been a Jewish lesbian in the entire Jewish tradition. You know, I mean, the Jewish community dealt with these things as the Jewish community did. Was the Jewish community going to want to advertise these things? No. They were going to talk about, you know, Jewish men don't beat their wives, Jews don't drink. We all know this until, you know, we read the stats. And, you know, I don't know what you guys do, but the number of synagogues I know that have AA groups is astounding for a community that has nobody who drinks. You know, and then, you know, before Susanna Heschel's article on wife abuse, you know, I mean, that was the dirty secret of the Orthodox community for generations. But everybody knew it, and they dealt with it, or they didn't deal with it. But again, you know, so small government's a good thing if it works. You know, the size doesn't matter. The values of the government matter. And that's what you keep finding. When you keep finding people talking about governments, they are more concerned with the values. Now, the trouble with that, of course, is that if we can't agree on the values, and we can't, then that leads to all sorts of issues. And I give you, you know, I don't want to go there, but I give you the state of Israel. I mean, we have one side who's got one view of reality, and we have a totally different side that's a totally different view of reality. They're equally Jewish or equally basing themselves on Jewish sources. They equally will tell you this is Torah the Moshe Sinai. Even the secular Jews will tell you that this is what Judaism stands for. They can all read the sources. They quote one another back and forth. They just believe different things and different values. Jews have always done that. There are some Jews, you know, who will tell you, all right, the traditional sources don't matter. And then they'll start telling you what they believe in. And all of a sudden you hear a line of Torah, or you hear a line, you know, if the modern, they've read, they're on Sefaria, so they can quote anybody they want to quote. In, you know, they can give you a quote from Maimonides all the way out of context. You can quote, you know, 3 words of anybody, you know, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that you understand that Judaism doesn't want us all to be the same. There's a statement in the Talmud of the land of Israel, the Yerushalmi. Any ruling by any body king was an authorized age, just Torah the Moshe Sinai. is Torah given to Moses from Sinai. We don't have, I mean, you know, as I always begin my lectures on Jewish diversity, tell me what other religion has two chief rabbis? Not only does the country have two chief rabbis, but every city has two chief rabbis. And they're ignored by the entire Haredi community. I mean, you know that. I know that. And yet we have survived for 2,000 years on that because we agree on much more than we disagree on. We agree on the value of the individual right within the context of the community. We agreed on a shared history. We agreed on a shared, in a positive sense, mythology. I mean, it always amazes me that people are upset that Christians don't understand the Holocaust the way we do. Why should they? I mean, why should they? They should have Rahmanas on us. And, you know, but it didn't happen to their brothers and sisters, except in very specific cases. And even those groups can't deal with it. I mean, we deal with it much better. I must also tell you, this idea that the news is unfair about what's going on in Israel drives me up a wall. The news is unfair because Jews traditionally, and I think this goes back to Moses Rabbeinu, have the worst PR system in the world. And we have never done anything about it except bitch. We do. I mean, anybody who was surprised by the current wave of American anti-Semitism knows nothing about American history and wasn't alive, I guess, when you guys were, or when I was in the 50s. It was common. I mean, you know, you younger people in the room who are all post 60s, when the world, all of a sudden, you know, the whole world was Jewish and Woody Allen was the big hero. That's another mistake, but that's, you know, the same thing. The world's the world. And why shouldn't, you know, we're not like them. We're very much like them, but we're also not like them in the fundamental way we look at the world. This, you know, I don't understand that. I also don't understand any conversation that begins, if only Israel would. The conversation should begin, if only Israel and the Palestinians would, then I'm willing to listen. But when they say, if Israel would only, I'm not interested. Because Israel isn't the only actor. It's not the only player. And anybody, you know, the PR, the way we do this, it's the same thing. And that's what this whole thing is about. If we take seriously our obligation to be active citizens and to be active Jews, that our responsibilities to ourselves, our responsibility to our community, and our responsibility to make sure our government officials live by the essential values of what we believe is right in Judaism is what our political theory should be. And that is what we should be voting. We shouldn't be voting because this guy has a view of this one thing. This is bizarre to me. We need to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture involves our security, but it also involves the security of humankind. It involves the security and the prosperity of human beings. There's a lot you can read in the beginning of Genesis, from the way the world was the way the world became in chapter 11. But the one thing which always impresses me is this idea, and it's not common in all other religious traditions, that humanity comes from one pair. All of us. We may not like, I mean, you all have cousins you can't stand. You all have in-laws you can't stand. You all have enemies in your family. You all have crooks, liars, and cheats in your family. If you don't have a family. And you're blessed for that. You all have siblings you sometimes don't like. I mean, that's the world. It doesn't mean that you can't talk and live with them. And that's what the government should do. And if you go through the 17 pages, you will see that that's really what this comes down to. The last two essays are the last essay by Daniel Alzar is from it's really interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with it, with these people, the Jerusalem political group. It's a 1986 essay that he wrote. They've done a lot of studies on Jewish political thought. It's from the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and it's 1986. If you read this, it could have been written in 1956. It could have been written in 2025. And it's going to be written in 2030. The one before it, which is also fascinating, written by in 1956, justifying why Dina de Malchut Dina applies to the state of Israel, even though there's no king, and even though the parliament is not the king, by a Supreme Court justice, is also fascinating, because one of the things we do is we justify the present by redefining the categories of the past. That's also Jewish political theory. On the first page, I give you my email. I'm always in front of my computer until about 5 o'clock when I watch the news. My wife screams at me for watching the news and she walks out of the room, but I enjoy the news. I like to know what's happening in the world. Yeah, I find it totally, I mean, I sit there and laugh. I cannot believe we're this stupid as human beings. I mean, the entire world is not us, this is Americans. The entire world is this stupid with these people that we have running our governments. And I mean governments within the world and the people we believe and what we swallow. But the rest of the time I'm on my computer, so if you send me an email and you have a question, you will get an answer. I promise you. You will get an answer. You may not like the answer, but you will get an answer. Anybody have any questions tonight? I mean, yeah. Oh, here goes the mic. She loses 12 pounds in one of these things, doesn't she?
So the whole idea of us and them, I mean, the idea of us is particular, the idea of them is universal. We always have a shift in values going back and forth. How much emphasis should we place on one? How much emphasis should we place on the other? The 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, I think in the Jewish community, certainly the liberal Jewish community, was heavily focused on them. Let's help them. Do you see a shift back now towards helping us with what's going on in the world and particularly in government right now? We just saw our vice president with his value system basically saying, look, we don't care about that. It's, you know, who's your name, who's your immediate neighbor, who's your community, who's your nation. So he's an us guy.
I have two things to say about that. Judaism, by definition, is an us religion. We didn't become a them religion until Christianity universalized us. And that's true. And being a minority culture for 2,000 years, made us more that. I think you're right, that what happened in the 60s, when the whole, I mean, you guys don't remember this, the whole world was Jewish. There was a record. And the whole world was Jewish. I mean, everybody, after the 67 war, I had people coming out of the woodwork of my dorm who wanted to claim, well, my great-great-grandmother was Jewish before she married the Catholic and you converted, I mean, I'm serious. And we were the heroes and everybody wanted to be like us. And we Jews believed it, which is fine because, it's nice to be liked and whatever. I think what's happening now is we are being forced to confront the reality. I will give you my theory about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the dark underside of Western civilization, as is anti-Black, anti-Asian, anti-women. I mean, Western civilization is really, the gloss on the top has so much crap underneath it that you wonder how we have survived since the Enlightenment. I mean, the Enlightenment was anti-women, it was anti-Asian. We were the only ones they knew. And we have been able to live since literally 67, but a little bit before. Until this particular Gaza war, and it's basically a PR job, believing that we're a part of the American society. But you don't live, I grew up in a small town, 22 churches, 12 Jews in the 50s and 60s. I taught at a university where anti-Semitism wasn't rampant, but everybody, you knew it was there in all sorts of very subtle ways. I used to have students come to me all the time. And you would say, don't worry about it. We're not worried about it. And we're worried about the lies being told about us. And this has nothing to do with the fact of whether or not you agree with the Israeli government, which is a totally different issue, or whether or not you are physically and visibly upset by the slaughter of the Palestinian children and the civilians. This is nothing, these are not related. Because the anti-Semitism that's going on in America is not related to this. The right and the left are closing in on us because the right and the left is, I don't know. Well, you guys are all, if you remember the SDS, in the 60s, the radical left was virulently anti-Semitic. They all were. The right was always anti-Semitic because we killed Christ. The left was anti-Semitic because in the 60s we were the scum bears because we had all the power, we had all the money, and we had all the stereotypes. As I keep saying, if we had all the money, I wish they would throw some my way, but they never do. But it's now coming out. And it has nothing, it has a lot to do with anti-Semitism in America is now accepted. It's understood. And we feel, rightly so, that we are being squeezed by both sides, and we are. Not for good reasons, and not for legitimate reasons, but we are. But that's who we are. It doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me, these campus uprisings. If you guys knew how well funded the Students for Justice in Palestine has been for the last 45 years, and who's funding them, and how well organized they are. This was true when we had no riots all of them was there. We were great friends with the FBI. We were great friends with the anti-Shah people. We were great friends with all these people. We were great friends with the Palestinians. You know, we knew what they were doing. They knew that we knew what they were doing. You know, but we had boundaries and we had rules. Those boundaries don't exist anymore. And that's all. And we feel it. The veneer is broken. The crap, excuse me, but the crap is rising to the surface. One can hope that it will eventually go down. It's not us and them. That's just too simplistic, I think. And it's not all of it. But them who are doing it are not being challenged by those who object to it. Because they don't feel they have a moral ground to object. And that's what I find to be despicable. My one last story, during the oil boycott, I went to I went to a lecture and there were all of these ministers up there. It was the Zionism, it was the boycott, the Zionism is racism crap. And they all started out by saying, I have Jewish friends, or I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. They all had to give me their bona fide Jewish credentials. Not one of them stood up and said, I am a Christian, I don't know anything about Jews, but this is wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong to condemn a bunch of people who live in America who are honest, upright, and working in society for something that people that they don't have any connection to may or may not be doing because you saw it in a 3-minute clip on, or 15-second clip on TV, or you read it on a TikTok, or you saw it or something else. That's wrong. You wouldn't stand up. I mean, you wouldn't take it if somebody were doing that. If you saw somebody being totally degraded in front of you, one would hope you would stand up and do something about it. At least I hope you would. I would. And I hope you would. Regardless of all the crap. You support people who you respect or people who need help in that moment. That's what it means to be Jewish. That's what it means to be a human being. It's not us and them. It's what it is to be a Jewish human being. And it is what it means to be a Christian human being. And it is, I might say, what it means to be a Muslim. I mean, Islam has a wonderful set of ethics. But they're afraid to stand up. The vast majority of Christians are afraid to stand up. And the Jews feel put upon. And you know, we shouldn't be surprised. But we should feel put upon. Anybody else? I know it's way past it. Yeah.
Well, the last question, and then I'm gonna turn off the Zoom, but we can stay here and talk for a hot minute because the maintenance is waiting for us to leave, so they can lock up.
So thank you for a very interesting program. I believe I'm older than you because I grew up in the 40s and 50s and got married in 1960. I had always been aware of anti-Semitism. When I was a child, I was taunted for being Jewish. When I was at the University of Illinois in Champaign, it was very segregated. There were Jewish sororities and Jewish fraternities. There were Gentile. And there were Black fraternities and Black sororities, and no mixing. And so things are different. But I feel the way things are today is something that in all my years I never dreamed I'd see in this country. I always, even though there was anti-Semitism, I always felt safe here. I can't say that I feel that way anymore. What do you say about that?
Well, I think a lot of people don't feel safe, and I think it has to do, one, again, I don't want to insult anybody, but I'm a real believer that everybody should have a gun. Living downtown, I mean,
Wait, should or should?
shouldn't. It's my opinion that, people shouldn't have guns. I don't know whether it's any less safe. I think what it is now that it even wasn't in the 50s is it's much more accepted. I mean, in the 50s, if you wanted to hear again, I grew up in a small town where we were the only Jews, and the anti-Semitism was everybody knew my father minded because he had a furniture dry goods store. The anti-Semitism was there, and UCLA in the 60s, it was there. You knew it, but the 60s were changing. I think a lot of people don't feel safe. I don't think it's not just the Jews. But I agree with you. I think that the public rhetoric, and I don't want to say that living in echo chambers is it, but I think the public rhetoric and what you hear people saying, you wonder where civilization has gone to. The civil code is totally out the window, and I find that scary because I do think that we have devalued all human beings, and we have devalued the Jewish human being publicly much more than was true. Anti-Semitism in my day was because we were Christ killers and because we were all money hungry. I think now we are all bloodthirsty killers of innocent human beings. Therefore, we deserve to die. And I do find that scary. But the rhetoric's changed. And but again.
We want to say thank you.
Thank you for putting up with this.
Sunday is only in person. There's copyright laws, and if you have any questions, I'm sure Russ will answer, and I will attest that he is at his computer and he replies right away. It's good seeing everybody here. Bye-bye.